Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Accord & Company webinar featuring TimberScan Titanium for Sage Intacct Construction. Our presenter today is Mike Carbonneau from Core Associates, an Avid Exchange company. A few notes before we get started. Everyone is muted for a clean listening experience. If you have questions, please type them into the questions box and we will be happy to address them at the end of the session. For the best visual experience, please maximize your screen. This webinar is being recorded and the link will be emailed out to everybody later on today. I will now turn it over to you, Mike.
All right, Krista, thank you very much and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. So yes, very excited to be able to show you TimberScan Titanium for Sage Intacct. I'm going to start with just a brief PowerPoint presentation, only a few slides, just to kind of set things up. And then we'll jump right into the product. We're going to spend the majority of our time in the product, and I'll kind of walk through some scenarios and what have you. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Some of you may be familiar with Core Associates. Core Associates created a product called TimberScan many years ago, 2008. That product was designed as an AP automation solution exclusively for Sage 300 CRE. And it was designed with the idea of taking time-consuming manual processes and being able to automate them. Over the course of the last 14, 16 years, what have you, we have over 35,000 users of our products. So what we did with TimberScan was when Sage Intacct began to evolve, we evolved TimberScan. We created a new, in essence, a new TimberScan specifically for Sage Intacct, and that's what you're going to see today. So many of the same conventions, if you're familiar with TimberScan at all, many of the same conventions that were built into TimberScan will exist in TimberScan Titanium. It has all of those same key features in terms of AP workflow. So Titanium is a purchase-to-pay solution, and you're going to hear a lot more from us over the course of time talking about purchase-to-pay. So what do we mean by that? We mean the ability to manage everything from the initial purchase, whether that was from a purchase order being created, or if it's just the invoice as it arrives at your door, and being able to manage that all the way through the pay process. So what TimberScan and TimberScan Titanium will provide is the ability to be able to do all of those things from purchase through the management of the invoices through the pay without ever having to touch a piece of paper. It involves things like email monitoring, acquire automation, OCR capture for the AP invoices, and then of course the ability to be able to manage everything from a decentralized or mobile environment. So this system is designed to work in any type of environment on any type of device. So we're going to go through that particular process in a couple of minutes, and we'll talk about that. I think just to kind of summarize, the idea behind our application is the one system, one platform, one data entry point designed specifically for Sage Intacct. Automated workflows designed exclusively for Sage Intacct. I think that's one of the big keys. And again, it follows the conventions that we designed with TimberScan, where it is created with the idea of Intacct in mind. Everything related to Intacct is associated with what we do with TimberScan Titanium. And then the ability to create those electronic packets where you can see not only the data that gets sent to Sage Intacct once a workflow is completed, but all of the supporting documents, the invoice, payments, and everything else that comes along with it. So this is the last slide that we're going to show before we actually get into the product. And what this is going to do is this will set up basically what I'm going to cover over the next several minutes. So basically what you're seeing here is a workflow depiction, and this might look quite simple. Basically kind of 4 steps, if you will, in this workflow process, but there's a lot that goes into this. So this is going to start at the point where an invoice arrives at your door. And regardless of how you receive that invoice to get it into TimberScan Titanium, we're going to talk about the different options for which you can go about doing this, and there are several. But once the invoices have been initially acquired, they're going to go to data entry in TimberScan Titanium. So a lot of times when I meet with a company, one-on-one, that's looking to solve their AP workflow process that they have today, many times what they'll say is, well, we send it to the project manager, for example, first, and then accounting handles it. That situation sort of gets a little bit flipped here, but it's actually a good thing, because what we're doing is we're starting to code information onto the invoice before it gets to the approver. Now, what's nice is that this could involve everything from matching it to a purchase order, for example, to as simple as perhaps we know what project number it's associated with, but we don't know how it's supposed to be coded other than that. The beauty of TimberScan Titanium is you can enter partially coded invoices and send them off to the approvers. The approvers will be getting alerts, notifications, if you will, letting them know that they have invoices to approve. They will come into TimberScan Titanium to approve their invoices. Again, as I mentioned on a previous slide, all of this can be done on any device in any environment. So if I'm let's say I'm a project manager, I'm not in the office, I need to be able to go in and call up my invoice, look at it, make some modifications to it, and then approve it. I can do so from my phone. I can do it from home if I'm on my iPad, or if I'm in the office, for example, and I just want to log into my desktop, anything works. Ultimately, once those invoices get approved, they end up updating Sage Intacct. And it's not an export, import, or anything like that. Once the approval process completes, those invoices automatically update Sage Intacct. Not only do we send the data to Sage Intacct, but we also send, as I mentioned before, all of the documentation. So the invoice, any of the supporting documents, all the way down to the payment record, the check, whatever it might be. So what we're going to do next is we're going to walk through this workflow process. I'm going to step through each of these parts of the application, and we're going to kind of work the workflow from purchase to pay. And we'll do all of those steps within the system. So let's go ahead and get out of the PowerPoint. Now I've already logged into both Sage Intacct and I've logged into TimberScan Titanium. So let's start in Titanium. Okay, so basically what you're seeing here, this is the kind of the main menu, or the, when I first log in, this is the view that I see in TimberScan Titanium. It is a browser-based application. It's a cloud-based application. So this runs in the cloud just like Sage Intacct does. Connects very conveniently to the application. Over here on the side panel, you have all of your various applications with which you can work. So, you know, in here under data entry, we have a number of options, including acquire, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, and so on and so forth. As I select any of these, it will open up that part of the application here into the main body of the window. You're also seeing my dashboard in front of me. So a couple of comments on the dashboard. First of all, number of different graphs and charts and what have you that you can see. And if I take the, if I start to hover the mouse on the pie chart, you notice how what it does is it will highlight for me the, in this case by vendor, it will tell me the vendor, and it will tell me the total outstanding dollar amount for that particular vendor. And I can just kind of scroll around, do the same thing by project here. So you get that kind of 20,000 foot view of what is occurring based on certain criteria right up front without having to run any type of report or what have you. Now, what you're also seeing is that I'm, let's say, at perhaps an executive level or an administrative level where I can see everything. So I'm looking at this from the top level down. I'm seeing all of our outstanding invoices, what the outstanding dollar amount is, anything that's on hold and what's overdue. Obviously, we need to get a lot of things addressed here. But what you can also do is I can start to focus in on certain people and see where they stand. So if I want to just, for example, select this particular approver, for example, I can see Leanne has 8 outstanding invoices right now. Here's the dollar amount that she's responsible for. And I can start to see, oh, okay, it looks like the majority of what she has outstanding is this A1 electric. So, you know, I can start to just very quickly isolate and see certain things. So the beauty of this is that very quickly, without having to do anything, run any type of reports or what have you, I'm able to, if I want to focus in on specific people, users, if you will, or if I want to see this from the top level, I can do any of those things from the dashboard. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get started through the workflow process. And what we're going to do is we're going to start at the point where an invoice arrives at your door. Regardless of how you receive the invoice, to get it into TimberScan Titanium, you're going to choose the acquire function. Now, there are a couple of fields that you're going to fill in first. The first is the data entry group that you would assign the invoices to. So what that means is, if you think back to the PowerPoint slide, once the invoices get acquired, they're going to go to AP data entry. They're not going off to the approvers yet. They're going to start in AP entry. So what we need to do is we need to determine who is it that's going to be getting these invoices after they're acquired. Who is it in accounts payable, for example? And it could be a person, it could be a group, so you can put people into groups. You can have multiple people, multiple groups, it doesn't matter. But basically, I just happen to have this one person or group, so I'm just going to go ahead and select them. And then the second thing I'll do is I'll determine what type of document it is. In this case, these are just invoices that we're acquiring. And then we'll go out and we'll start to do the acquire process. So there are several ways in which you can acquire an invoice, as I mentioned. One, I can just drag and drop. So in this case, I happen to have this 2-page invoice that's sitting here on my desktop. If this were something that got emailed to me, if it was in a file or a folder and I just want to drag and drop, I can just go ahead and do so. And then once I've dragged and dropped it into the viewer here and say continue, it opens up those pages into the main body of the window. Now, you know, one of the things that I can do is, let me just roll this over just a little bit. I can look at this, you know, both pages together if I want. If I needed to, you know, there could be a scenario where I got multiple pages, but I have all sorts of different options here from which I can choose to go into the application and be able to split these, separate them, do whatever I need to do in the process of acquiring those particular invoices. So drag and drop is one option. A second option would be invoices that perhaps came in by mail. So invoices that arrive in the mail, what you're going to do is you're going to put them onto your scanning device and you'll scan them to a designated file that we'll use to be able to acquire them in TimberScan Titanium. So again, we just go in here, we say, here's who we're going to assign them to once they get acquired. Here's the types of documents that we're going to acquire. Here are the invoices that got scanned to that particular file. And I'll just sweep through and grab a whole stack of them all at once, and I can just open them up all together. So drag and drop, scan. The third option is email. More and more companies now have set up a designated email address where they've asked vendors and subs to be able to email their invoices. TimberScan Titanium has an email monitoring program. And basically what it does is behind the scenes, it's watching that email address, and it will take the attachment from the email and it will pull it into a file for you. So what does that do? It means that I don't have to manually go out and constantly monitor that email address and constantly drag and drop every single attachment from the email into this, into the acquire screen. The system basically does all of that for you behind the scenes. So in here, I just go in, open the file, and I can just go grab this whole stack of invoices all at the same time, open them up, and then again, have the same option of being able to, scroll down through, annotate, do whatever I need to do before I go through the process of acquiring those invoices. Okay, so there's one other tool that you can also utilize with respect to acquiring invoices, and it's called auto acquire. So it works hand in hand with the email monitoring program. And basically what it does is it will allow you to not only monitor the AP email address, grab the attachment from the email, but it will automatically acquire the invoice and it will drop it into AP invoice entry for you automatically. So where that occurs, I'm going to actually come down here to the auto acquire settings and I'll show you an example. So basically what this is saying is that, and you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can do a wildcard or you can have a specific invoice. So let's say any invoice that I'm getting from, invoices at abcsupply.com, for example. Let's just use that as my example. So any invoices or any documents that I get from abcsupply.com that are coming to my designated AP email address, I'm going to automatically assign them to this person or group in AP entry. If they happen to send me more than one invoice in a PDF, for example, I'm going to say, okay, if I see something that says invoice one of, that means I know that I have more than one. So I need to be able to split these. So I'll just auto split them. And then if I happen to have an OCR capture template set up for ABC Supply, it will read the OCR information and it will populate the AP entry with that OCR data. So in summary, what you can do is you can use the auto acquire hand in hand, in essence, with the email monitoring, where it monitors the email address, it pulls the attachment from the email, it assigns it to where it needs to go in AP entry, splits any duplicate, or not duplicate, but multi-page invoices, and processes the OCR associated with it if I happen to have an OCR capture template associated for ABC Supplies invoices. Puts it all in AP entry and it's done, ready to go. As soon as I open up AP entry, it's there. Don't have to do any type of an acquire process. Okay, so that's step one. That's taking the invoices once they arrive at our door and getting them into the application. Let's go to the next step, which is AP entry. And one of the things that you'll notice here, there are two distinct AP entry screens here that I want to highlight. AP bill entry and purchasing entry. Now, this might seem a little bit confusing when I kind of explain this at first. But anytime I acquire an invoice, it's going to drop that invoice into both of these queues. So regardless of whether I go into AP bill entry or I go into purchasing entry, those same invoices that I acquired are sitting in both queues. Why did we do that? Well, the reason we did it is because the way that we've tied the integration between TimberScan Titanium and Sage Intacct, we're directly tied to the purchasing application in Sage Intacct. So when a purchase order gets created in Sage Intacct, we can retrieve that purchase order information into TimberScan Titanium on the invoice and populate the line item information from the purchase order. And because of that, there are some additional fields that are required in order to be able to retrieve that particular purchase order information. So you may have a scenario where some of your invoices have a purchase order associated with that. You might have other, let's just say, invoices that don't necessarily require, maybe administrative, whatever, that don't require purchase orders. Those would be better served if you just go through AP bill entry. Less fields that you need to fill in and what have you in order to actually get the invoice processed and get it sent off for review and approval. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into purchasing entry first. We're going to start there. I happen to have 8 invoices sitting in my queue, and I'm going to call up this first invoice here for Cook's Lumber. And what I think I'll do is, this already has quite a bit of information on it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this invoice. We're going to start this over again. Looks like someone set up an OCR template for us. So I'm just going to go out here. I'm going to delete the invoice and see if I have a Cook's Lumber. I do. I'm going to delete this as well. Okay, and we'll just go ahead and start this over again. So let's go back in. I'm going to go into, whoops, I'm going to go back and I'm going to acquire first. And we'll go out, we'll find Cook's Lumber, and we'll actually go through this process of acquiring this invoice. Okay. Invoice gets acquired. In a second, this will update. Okay, so it's now in the purchasing entry queue again. Let's go back in there and let's open this back up. All right, so you notice now it says capture template was not matched. So basically what I did is I acquired a Cook's Lumber invoice, and you notice I had gone out and I deleted that OCR template. So I wanted to get a clean invoice that we could call up that doesn't have an OCR template set up for it yet. But one of the things that you'll notice when you first open up the invoice is there are certain fields on the invoice that are highlighted in different colors, and certain things are already filled in. Okay, the invoice date, for example. If you scroll over a little bit further, the bill number, the invoice number. Because basically what we did is we built something, a tool into the application called Smart Extraction. What Smart Extraction does is it looks for certain key fields like invoice number, date, total dollar amount. And where it can identify those things, it will populate the grid, the screen with that particular information. And I'm going to talk about how we can then apply other things to an OCR template in a few moments. But what I want to do is I just want to talk about the basics, the mechanics of the AP entry screen and how easy it is to work with. So first of all, you'll notice that I have the invoice image in the upper part of the window. I have my data entry grid down here in the lower part of the window. What we did is we designed this in a grid format like you see here. However, these fields are all aligned in the exact same order as they are in Sage Intacct, and they work the exact same way. So anything that I do a search on, if I come in here and I want to go by entity ID, we'll say it's general construction, it selects that information. If I want to search by converted from, and I'll show that in a few minutes, I can do that. If I'm searching the vendor file, for example, you can either, anytime you see one of these little hourglasses, that means that there's a particular file associated with this that I can go search from. Or if I just want to start typing, for example, Cook's Lumber, it will go out and it will find Cook's Lumber. So you can do either one. Another thing about the data entry grid is I can move things around. So if I decided, you know what, I want to have the invoice image on the left side and the data entry grid on the right, I just go ahead and say, click on this change mode button, and it does so. So now I can have the invoice image on one side, and I can have my data entry on the other. And if I feel like moving it back, I just go ahead and I move it back. Another thing that I can do is, if I wanted to take this particular invoice and maybe slide it off to a a second screen. So maybe I've got dual screens, and I say, okay, I want to be able to see the invoice image in full view, and I want to have the data entry grid in front of me. So there's a little up arrow here. You just click on it. Take this particular invoice. I just slide it off to my second screen. I now have my data entry grid on one screen. I have my invoice image on the other. If you want to bring it back, you just click on the down arrow, and back it comes. So far, we basically have, taken an invoice. We started to process some of the basic information on the invoice. Haven't even gotten to any of the distribution yet or anything like that. Now, here, any of the fields that I happen to be selecting, for example, the vendor, if I click on the history button, I can go out and I can look at all of the invoices very quickly for that particular vendor. So here I am, I'm looking at, here's my history of, I have some questions about maybe a previous invoice that we may have processed for Cook's Lumber, or maybe there's a duplicate invoice or something that I need to address. And if you click on the little plus sign here, it then shows you how that coding was done on that particular invoice. And you can also call up that particular invoice image if you want. So literally in a matter of seconds, I'm able to, and you can also show job costing. So now, if I want to be able to see, how it was coded, what jobs, projects, cost codes, any of that, I have all of that information for me. So, in a matter of just a couple of seconds, I'm able to see just a plethora of information associated with that particular, vendor, the project that it might be associated with, any of those things that I want to be able to get information on. You also have these little info buttons here, these inquiries. Basically, they're tooltips. So if I select this, I get some basic tooltip information, and I'll give you a better example with something else here in a few minutes. But it's giving me some of the basic information about Cook's Lumber. I'll do one for a particular purchase order here in a couple of minutes. But now let's just say that I'm here, and I mentioned how some of the information already got extracted onto the data entry grid for me from what we call our Smart Extraction tool. But I decide, you know what? We're going to be getting a lot more invoices from Cook's Lumber. I don't want to have to keep going in here and keying in or selecting their vendor code. I want the system to automatically default that. So right from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, let's go out and let's add a capture template. We'll call it Cook's Lumber. Easy enough. What it's going to do in a matter of a couple of seconds, it will create the template. So far what it did with the template is it just said, okay, go out and find me, that basic information that it would get from the Smart Extraction, the invoice number, the date, the dollar amount. We'll just go ahead and save that. We're not going to add anything special at this point. But now what it's going to do is it's going to jump back here and notice how that vendor field now has a little plus sign on it. So basically what it's saying is, if I wanted to, I just click on the plus sign, and it now saves that particular field to that OCR coding profile. So what will happen is, anytime I receive an invoice from Cook's Lumber going forward, it will then apply not only the Smart Extraction information, but also the vendor code. Now, you could actually get quite extensive with the information that you want to retrieve from an invoice. I might have an example of one here if I scroll back for a moment. Let's go in, I think it might be this one. Okay, yeah. So here's an example of an invoice that not only does it read the bill number, the billing date, the due date, but because A1 Electric put their subcontract number or their PO number, for example, on their invoice, the system was able to, sorry about that, my apologies here. The system was able to read the subcontract number, and it populated that information. So now the distribution of that particular invoice is already done. So I come into the system. Think about this. I could have received an invoice from A1 Electric by email. The system could have automatically acquired it, put it in data entry for me. And then once it was in data entry, the system read all of this information from that particular invoice, and it populated everything all the way down to the distribution. I never had to touch the keyboard. Everything's done. If I have any supporting documents, I can just go ahead and click on supporting documents, see if there's anything there. If there were, for example, a purchase order or subcontract, and I wanted to see that information, I could go ahead and I could process that. So in a matter of seconds, you can get an invoice in, you can process all of the information associated with the invoice, and you can get it sent off to the approvers. Now, how does it get to the approvers? Basically, you have what's called the workflow setup. So you're going to build the business rules behind the scenes to allow you to be able to send the invoice off to the approvers. And those business rules are meant to reflect how you route invoices today. If you said, well, what we normally do is, we normally route invoices, for example, to the project manager on that particular project. What you can do is we can actually read that information from the project in Sage Intacct, and we can route it off accordingly. If it happens to be more than just one person, you can have multiple approvers. You can set up things like thresholds. Invoices greater than a certain dollar amount can be escalated up to another level of approval. All of those things can be done. But what you're also seeing here, if you notice, is how the interaction between the purchasing application works, where it just references, where it was converted from, and it populates the screen for you. Let me actually go back here, take that invoice that we were looking at previously, the Cook's Lumber invoice, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab, I don't know if I have a purchase order or subcontract for Cook's Lumber, but we'll go out and we'll see if we can find something. Maybe not, but I won't go too far into this. We'll just grab anything here just for an example. All right, we'll just take, for example, let's just take this. Now we'll use this one right here. What it's going to do, it's going to go out, it's going to find that purchase order or subcontract in Sage Intacct. It's now retrieving the information, and any of the line item information that's associated with it, it's going to go ahead and populate the distribution grid for me. What it will also do is it will allow me, if going forward, I want to see how it just pulled in the information. Here's my line item info here. And of course, I can go down and I can make any modifications here. If this needs to be conversion type is actually not supposed to be quantity, but it's something else, I can modify any of these fields here before I go ahead and save and route this. Now, what I also mentioned is that you can also set up invoices that are partially coded. So maybe, I've only put in the project number, but I don't have the cost type, for example. They can still be routed to the approvers, and the approvers can come in and they can finish the coding on the invoice if need be. Okay, so those are the basics of the AP entry. It allows for quickly processing, selecting an invoice from a purchase order if I need to, processing against that purchase order, populating the line items, giving me the opportunity to override anything that I need to, for example, and then get the invoice off to the approvers accordingly. Now we're going to jump over to the approval side. One of the things that I wanted to mention is we do have a notification system built into the application. What you can do with the notification system is you determine when and how often you want to be able to send someone a notification or an alert. So what you could do is you could say, we want to be able to notify anyone that's receiving an invoice, perhaps once or twice a day, or maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, they're going to get an email notification letting them know that they have invoices to approve. But the notification system can also send alerts. So what you can do is you can send an alert saying this invoice is within 5 days of the discount date or 3 days of the due date, to allow for that person to continually be alerted that we need to take immediate action here. And those alerts can be sent to other people if need be as well. Okay, let's switch over. Let's become an approver. And what I'm going to do is here in document automation, my workflow task queue is where I go find my invoices to approve. Now, what I could do as an approver, obviously you can also set up the system so maybe an approver only needs access to the workflow task queue. So you can shrink this and only give access to this particular area, and all the other stuff they don't really need to be able to see or access, so that just gets eliminated from the menu. In here, if I, basically what you're seeing here, there are a couple of action buttons that are right here on the invoice itself before I ever even open up the invoice. There's a reject button, so if I said, I'm looking at this invoice, you know what, this doesn't belong to me, it wasn't my particular purchase order or what have you, I'm just going to go ahead and reject it. And right from here, I can reject it, send it back to one of the previous destinations that it came from. There's also the option of syncing the task. Now, the reason why there is a third option, you're not seeing it on any of my examples here, but there is an option here where I could potentially just go ahead and approve the invoice right from here. However, because of the fact that there is some action that needs to take place on these invoices, I can't just automatically approve it, which means that there's something that I need to do. I need to go in and make some sort of a modification or addition to the invoice in order to get this fully approved. So when I click on sync the task, it opens up the invoice. Now, in this case, you can see the cost type has not been filled in. So I'm going to have to finish this before I can leave here. What you can also do, I'm doing this on my desktop. I could switch this mode, switch to what we call form view. And then what I'm going to do is just shrink this down a little bit. Shrink this so it kind of simulates as if I were on a phone. So now I'm working on my iPhone, for example, and I have my invoice in front of me. I've got my data entry grid in front of me. I can scroll up here and I can see, here's how I need to code this. I need to select the project. I need to select, what particular cost type and what have you are associated with it. But regardless of whether I'm on my phone, I'm out of the office somewhere, I happen to pull this up on my phone, whether I am at home, maybe I'm sitting on an iPad. So with an iPad, of course, I got a little bit more room here to be able to work with, a slightly larger environment to work with. Or I happen to be sitting in the office and I'm sitting at my desktop and I decide, I don't need the form view here because I'm not working from a phone here, so I'll just switch back to the grid view. And I can do it this way. So you get that flexibility. It's the opportunity and the ability to approve, in essence, from anywhere. Now in here, of course, I can go in, fill in my cost type, and I can continue forward here. Some of the other things that I would do as an approver, I can put it on hold, or I can reject the invoice. If you do either of these two things, hold or reject, you have to put a reason in as to why you're putting it on hold or why you're rejecting. That way, if anyone else wants to know what the status is, they can come in and they can see it. What you can also do when you reject an invoice, if you have a scenario where you have multiple approvers, I could potentially be, let's say, the third person that's supposed to be approving this invoice. So 2 people prior to me have already seen it. They approved it, they sent it to me. I look at it and I say, you know what, I need to reject this. So I'm not just going to reject it, but send it all the way back to AP entry where it started. I just want to reject it back to the previous person that approved it because I'd like them to look at this and take some action. So depending on the people that are part of the workflow, they would all be listed here, and I could just go pick and choose and select who I want to be able to reject it back to. Obviously, I can make changes and save them if I need to. I can add notes here. I can go ahead and attach any supporting documents to the invoice if I need to. And then, of course, finally, what I can also do is I can approve the invoice. You do have the history. Oh, you know the other thing? Let's say I'm an approver and I want to be able to see, let me get some more detail on this particular purchase order and the information associated with it. So again, I choose the inquiry button, and what it will do is it will give me the opportunity to be able to see any of the detailed information associated with that particular purchase order right here on the screen. Bear with me just 1 second. It seems like I may have gotten disconnected. Oh, there it is. Okay. So it's looking at the original transaction information, what has been invoiced so far, what is currently in TimberScan Titanium, how it's balanced with the total paid. So you can see I can get these tool tips and what have you available to me pretty much anywhere throughout the application to be able to see any information that I need. But ultimately, if I needed to attach a supporting document or what have you, I can. I click on the approve button, and that invoice is now an approved invoice. And it would then move along in the workflow process to anyone else that needs to see it. Okay, so once the invoices go through the approvals and they update Sage Intacct, what happens in Sage Intacct is that not only does the data get transmitted, as I mentioned, but it also allows you to be able to see the invoice image and any of the supporting documents that are associated with that particular invoice. So it pulls up that information for you immediately on the screen, has the, here's the invoice, and if there were any supporting documents associated with it, I'd be able to see that as well. Back here in TimberScan Titanium, we now have gone through that. We acquired an invoice, we sent it through AP entry, used the OCR in many cases, or the Smart Extraction, where it allowed for very little intervention in terms of having the key information in, maybe matched it against a purchase order from Sage Intacct, sent it off for approval. Approvals are now done. Invoice is now updated in Sage Intacct. When you process the invoices or process those payments in Sage Intacct, if you're printing those, for example, printing checks, TimberScan Titanium allows you to be able to go through and attach that check image. I can go ahead, run that. I could take a whole batch of checks, print them out, or I could send them to a file or whatever I do, electronic file, and then we just pull them up, and those particular payment records are here for me to be able to go through and attach. It's not a one-on-one. If I had done 50 checks just now and I have acquired them into TimberScan Titanium, it would ripple through all 50 checks, and it attaches each check image to the invoices that it's paying. So what that then does is that over in in Sage Intacct, not only would I see the invoice, but I'd also see the attached payment record or check that's associated with it. And of course, I mentioned that we can do everything within Titanium from purchase to pay without having to touch the piece of paper. So we've also built a pay control system into the application where you don't necessarily have to print checks. You can process them through what's called the Avid Pay Network. And through Avid Pay, they would actually, the payment process would actually be done electronically. So if that's something that you wanted to consider, certainly something to think about, because we want to get to the point where if we're automating that AP workflow process from the time that the invoice arrives, then, we're still kind of doing a bit of an archaic or antiquated process if we're actually physically printing checks. Okay. One last note that I'll make here. In addition, I showed the dashboards on the front end, but we also have a series of reports and inquiries in the system, and they're very flexible in how they work. Now, if you were, for example, using or needed to be able to compile backup for a, time and material or cost plus billing, and I apologize, I thought I had, I thought on Teams that I had given myself do not disturb so that I wouldn't be getting these little pop-ups. So I apologize that they keep popping up in front of me, but I don't want to take the time at this point to go out and try and change my status. So my apologies when you see those little pop-ups. But basically here in the inquiries, what I can do is you can use this as something that I can see, basically just kind of on the screen. I did an invoice inquiry here. Gives me lots of information related to each of the invoices. What I could also do is I could say, let's just do this based on job costing information. So now I can go out here and I can start to see what projects are associated with this and what have you. Now, if I wanted to, what I could do is I could say, let's just isolate and let's do everything associated with project, I don't know, 20-003 or something like that. So I can go in, I can select that information, and then if I want, I'll just say I want to do a report. I'm going to sort it by, let's say, cost type, for example. We'll say we want to create PDFs. We want to be able to take the images and the report itself, combine them into a file. I can include, supporting documents if I need to, and I can just go ahead and create a report from this. What this does is for any type of a time and material or cost plus billing scenario, I can, the system will generate a report, but it will also compile all of the AP invoice backup to support that. So, for a scenario where normally I might have to go out and pull all of those AP invoices out of a file somewhere in order to be able to provide backup for T&M, cost plus billing, any type of substantiated billing type of report, the system will create it literally in a matter of seconds. And it looks something like this when it's done. Bring this up. So basically, here's my report on the front end, and then after I get through the report on the back end, I've got all of my AP invoices that are associated with, that I happen to pull up for that particular transaction. So it gives me all of that information immediately. Okay, so back here, we've kind of worked through the work, we've kind of taken ourselves through the entire workflow process from the point the invoices arrive at your door, sent them through the approval process. They've updated Sage Intacct. Any payment records can be attached, and all that data gets compiled and attached over in Sage Intacct, and it's always also available here, as you can see. So with that, I believe we are done with the presentation. Krista, I guess I will turn it back to you, and we can maybe open it up for any questions.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yep, we have a couple of questions in here, and if you do have more questions, please type them in. We'll be happy to answer them. The first question we have is, how do you know the email has been addressed by TimberScan so you are not duplicating?
Yes. So what happens is that once the invoice gets acquired, it deletes that particular record so that the email cannot be acquired a second time. So it watches in that particular program, it deletes the record. So, and even if, let's just say, which it wouldn't happen, let's just say that you happen to pull in the same invoice twice, the system will stop you when it recognizes a duplicate invoice anyway. So either way it stops, but the system deletes that particular record. It doesn't delete the email, but it basically deletes that transaction. It's almost like when you acquire something from a file, and then you delete the record from the file. It does the same thing here.
Okay, great. The next question is, are invoices maintained in TimberScan and then linked in Intacct?
Yes, they are. Yep.
Okay, it looks like that's all the questions we do have. If you do decide you have more questions, you can always reply to the recording email and we'll be happy to get them answered for you. Thank you, Mike, today for the presentation, and everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye now.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.